Hello everyone, Godre here, and welcome to Talknomics, brought to you by Nairametrics. Of course, we do this once every other week, and this is a show where we dissect the Nigerian economy. We look at macroeconomic issues, global issues, and identify policies that are working and are not working, and basically deep dive into things that affect every single one of us. Of course, on today's show, again, I have another very interesting guest, someone that I highly respect and I've known for quite a while, someone who doesn't only just cover the Nigerian economy, she globetrots and covers the entire sub-Saharan Africa and even more. Pleased here to welcome Amaka Nku.
Thank you for having me.
How you doing?
I'm good.
You're scarce.
Yeah.
It's only on social media we see you.
These days, even there, I'm not there.
I'm
running from all the
I know.
Those good old days.
We're going to talk about some of those things. I mean, I've got my own fair share of flags lately, especially in this dispensation where you're either black or white. Anyways, let's talk a little bit about you for some of our viewers who might not know who Amaka is and what she does. I mean, some of us in this space know you very well. Mm-hmm. So, what do you do?
Okay, so I run Africa for a company called Eurasia Group. It's a global political analysis and advisory firm. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that we help investors understand how politics impacts asset prices and the business environment, right? So our raison d'etre is if you don't understand the political constraints and incentives that policymakers face, you won't understand the economic outcomes and you can't properly prepare for them. So, for me, I take the role with a lot of responsibility because in some ways we're helping to shape how global capital sees Africa. And I think that even if my clients don't agree with what they see, the policy outcomes they see, they should at least understand it. That's my mission.
All right, so we're going to get into some of their perception of Africa in a bit, but I always like to start this show with what your ideology is, because I kind of always feel like your ideology oftentimes, impacts your view of the world. So whether it's political ideology or economic ideology, just to narrow it down as well. Okay. So would you consider yourself left, center, or right? Or these days, I think we have center and left.
I wouldn't put myself in any of those categories, but I will tell you what I believe. I'm very clear on what I believe. I'm not big on labels. I'm not a politician. I'm not a political party. But I believe that government has a very important role to play in society and in the economy and in markets. Whether it's to protect minority rights, human rights, to ensure functioning markets, to ensure delivery of service of public goods. So you can put me where you want to put me on that scale. But I would say that's a central core of my belief.
So in an utopian world where, Amaka is like the model citizen, so what kind of leaders, what kind of government would you want to see? Is there any country that's close to that in your view?
I want to see a government that is responsive to what the people want.
Okay.
Listens, but also communicates. I think that one of the things we haven't quite digested in Africa is that governance is 70% communication, right? I'm just making up that 67, but it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're not connecting with people over why what you're doing matters, you're not doing anything. It doesn't matter what you're doing, right? So communication is such an important part of governance and framing the issue. And it's not just about government, it's also about public intellectuals. That's one of the reasons I like what you're doing here, because I don't think we have enough, there are lots of really smart people in academia across the continent. There's not enough mainstreaming of those ideas in a way that is accessible to people, right? So I believe that you want a government that is responsive, accountable. A lot of that is communication, both down and up, and helps to ensure a level playing ground, right? So that means protection of minority rights, diversity, all of those good things.
I mean, interesting that you made that point, because government now, I mean, when I mean government around the world do have enough tools to better communicate, right? So unlike before, now you have social media, you have presidents now going on X and then just communicating directly and bypassing all the typical communication channels that some of us were used to years ago. Don't you think that should have enhanced communication over the last few years, or is it
yes and no, right? I'm sure you already know the answer to this, because yes, it's also made misinformation a lot easier. Whether it's on WhatsApp, on X, Facebook, you name it. It's also a lot easier. I mean, look, I'm in one of my WhatsApp groups with young African leaders from all over the continent. Somebody shared a video of one of these new hunter leaders in West Africa. And it turns out, and it looks very credible. It turns out it was probably made up. It was probably, And like there's a lot of that. AI. Wow. And he's sitting there in an interview, right, spouting a lot of Russian propaganda. So it's scary. Like, there's a lot of responsibility. Yes, it should be easier for governments, but it's also easier for malign actors to spread misinformation. And I think, to me, that makes it even more important that you're communicating as responsible citizens and as government.
All right. I guess if there's time, we'll probably talk more about communication, because I think it's also a very crucial part of governance, as you've said, and perhaps maybe that's where a lot of African countries, African governments need to do better.
Absolutely.
More importantly, for investments, right? Because we are in Africa, like I always say, constant. Like, the only thing that is constant in Africa is seeking investments. We're constantly looking for investment. And so, I mean, from your experience, what common misconceptions do investors get about Africa? Or about policymakers in Africa. And and how does that shape perhaps the sort of deals that they pursue? Because I mean, you seem to what's happening in Africa. You're on ground. And then your organization is essentially trying to make sure that the information that they get is correct and the best for them to make decisions. But misconceptions do happen because there are nuances that you have within this country. So how do you?
I would say the biggest challenge, and maybe that can be a misconception sometimes, is the lack of familiarity. Right? So it's different when if I go to your country on vacation, or I live in the country, or I know a lot of people who look like me, think like me, eat like me. I can see myself in that country, right? It's easier to identify, and things hit you differently, right? So there's also, in some ways, it's not a misconception. I think it's a challenge of familiarity, of lack of familiarity, sometimes lack of information, sometimes lack of data, sometimes lack of the statistics, right? Like, it's all a part of that, whole vacuum.
Clarity, misconceptions.
So that's what I would say is the challenge. And that's part of why organizations like mine exist, to help you understand better. When you understand better, it's less scary and it's less unknown, right? And you're more willing to take risks. So are there any specific examples that perhaps you've basically tried to clear from your experience, that wow, like, this is a huge misconception that people perhaps are misreading? I mean, it's hard to. There's so many there's so many ways to slice and dice that question. One of the things I would say, what I would say is that, for me, there's not a big difference. Sometimes there's not a big difference between outside investors and domestic sentiment, right? Okay. Outside investors often look to the domestic narratives, right? So this is what so if you want me to give like a very specific misconception, let's let's look at Nigeria. I mean, Nigeria, there are so many misconceptions about Nigeria, right? It's scary, it's crime-ridden, it's da-da-da-da. I mean, you can argue, but if you kind of zoom in on some of those data, you're probably more likely to be victim of a crime in South Africa, in Joburg, than in Lagos, right? Even, I was mugged in Cape Town. You go to Joburg and you talk, so many people have been victims of crime, much more than an average person in Lagos, right? People are afraid of getting their phone snatched on the streets. Nobody's really that afraid in Lagos. Doesn't mean that there's no crime, but so those misconceptions again is just from. But another one specific to economics, since we're talking, we're supposed to be talking about, is like before 2023, maybe during Buhari's era, there was a big, should I say, maybe on Twitter, but it also became a part of how people saw Nigeria. There was a big misconception, that all Nigeria had to do was just liberalize its currency. Right?
Yeah,
they're so stupid.
Free markets.
What are they doing, right? So silly. Just let it go, and all the money will flow. Capital will flow in, of course, because they'll find its natural balance, equilibrium. How magic that sounds, right? But of course, it
hasn't happened yet.
And I tease my Lagos people, because this is what you heard in Lagos every day. Oh, go Lagos! This kind of like almost like facile thinking, simplistic thinking, and. Of course, once it happened, almost in the way that people wanted it to happen, just let it go, right? Then people now start saying, "Oh, but the fundamentals," and I was like, "Well, the fundamentals."
Wasn't that what we were saying before?
And I used to have this argument with people there, and I'm like, "Guys, the supply and demand. If there's no supply, you're going to continue to have, of USD, of foreign currency. I'm just using USD because that's what we usually benchmark to. And the problem is that you need to earn more dollars. Central bank is not going to print dollars for you. Doesn't matter what they do. You have to earn the dollars. You have to produce.
Well, isn't that why that point?
Earn dollars.
But that's why they are doing that, because they are saying, look, if you don't free, then you're not going to earn. So let's free so that you can earn.
Fine, but if you have one product that is 95% of your exports, okay, and that product is not even denominated in naira. You don't need naira to get that product. It's in dollars. So even if you crash your currency to 1,000, 100,000 to the dollars tomorrow, you're still not selling enough things to earn dollars. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's not like the fundamentals is not based on maybe there's some equilibrium somewhere. At that point, will you have a government? Will you have a society? Will you have, so look, I'm just saying that was a misconception, that it was easy. That's the misconception. It's not that there isn't a way you can make. I think that today, I'm excited about a competitive naira that can hopefully start the process of getting Nigerians, because it's not just government. We talk about government. Government is not going to produce for you. Yeah. Getting the Nigerian private sector to think more about exports, right? But it doesn't happen overnight. It's a long process. Yeah. And just liberalizing your currency doesn't just bring the capital flowing in. You still have to do the hard work of producing and selling. Yeah.
Okay, so
you have to create the exports that are actually competitive.
I agree. Some would also tell you, hey, look, us trying to correct the perception out there as well is trying to show that we can actually adopt orthodox policies, the sort of policies that so-called global investors like to see in economies, right? And these are usually the steps towards being attractive as a country, even though it's not a silver bullet, right? Yeah. So the FX policy is one of those ones that we've seen. Yeah,
I don't even think it's orthodox. Just mind you. Oh well, I don't like the word orthodox.
We will get to that. Well, of course, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But of course, you can address that with this other question. Yeah. One of the things that we've also done is subsidy removal.
Yeah.
We've also had some new laws come on stream. We have SEC Act done, CAMAs all done.
Yeah.
You have the Petroleum Industry Act done. So you've seen a number of laws happen. So some of these reforms that we've seen so far, does it in any way, or has it in any way changed the perception of perhaps some of the global investors or people that you've been speaking to?
Absolutely.
In a positive way?
Absolutely. Yeah, Nigeria has been one of the biggest reform stories, right, since 2023. Because of those reforms. Look, if you think about it, Nigeria was running some form of subsidy for 50 years. That's half a century, right? Country has existed for 60 years, right? So it's a huge deal. It's a huge deal. Not to be underestimated that we've now closed the chapter on it, and importantly, not only have we closed the chapter on it, socialized it such that nobody's credibly saying we need to get back to subsidies, right? So that has been impactful, and liberalizing the FX markets has been a big part of that too, and has really changed the perceptions. Because again, I was making fun of the misconception because it was the assumption that it's so simple, right? Like how just do this and it fixes it without the acknowledgement that you have to do it. So the
misconception of expectations.
Yes,
that's it.
Misconception that there was an easy solution to Nigeria's problems. That was a misconception.
Okay.
That there was an easy solution. The Nigeria's problems is really about productivity, not about where you put your FX, right? That was a symptom of the problem. That's the point I'm making. So the misconception was that this was the problem, whereas no, that wasn't the problem. That was a symptom of the problem. The problem was productivity. But yeah, has it changed perceptions? It has. It's easier if you are an investor, you want to have some sense of, I'm not, the currency is somewhat, fair, even if you fair value, or at least close to it, or at least there's some price discovery, and you're not just going to come in and tomorrow it'll shift by 30% or 50% or something, right? And importantly, that you can get out, right? So it has changed, and this is it's new. Look, I think this is the first time, you tell me you've been around longer, but I think this is one of the first times for Nigeria without high reserves, right? That's very important. Without FX, a significant chunk of FX reserves, that you have a flexible currency, right? And you're not when you have 60 billion and you can defend it, and you say it's flexible, right? So it's an important muscle to build. And that needs to come in. And I think that the authorities are so far doing a good job of it. It needs to come with a lot of communication. It needs to come with a lot of, credibility. It needs to come with a lot of adaptability. And we are getting there. But yes, it has helped with perceptions.
Okay, so, it's helped with perceptions. Globally, investors like what they're saying. Like you said, the reform, message out there is good, as strong as positive. I also felt some of that recently as well, outside the country. So people ask me, okay, so where's the money then? Why are they not in yet? What are they waiting to see? Why don't we have billions of dollars in investments in here? Typically, capital
goes back to my question.
FPIs come in first, and then you start to see FDIs. But we haven't even seen FPIs, at least at the level that we're expecting.
There has been FPI.
Not that.
A lot of my clients are in. No.
Okay.
I don't know what level you expecting, but there has been FPI. At some point, we're doing
$10-15 billion in FPIs annually. Doesn't look like we did that last year. We didn't do that last year.
No.
Probably not close to that now. So.
But given the vulnerabilities, right? It's true.
Global vulnerabilities or
Nigeria's vulnerabilities.
Okay.
We're paying a lot. It's true. We have brought in a lot of FI. We have brought in a lot of FPI. Probably 6, 7. We're paying a lot for it. Nigeria's paying a lot for it. Like interest rates are really high. Billion. Okay. Yeah. Interest rates are really high, so that means it's not coming it's coming. You're paying, right? It's not cheap. But. So your question leads me right back to where we started, that misconception, right? Which is FDI has to follow. FPI is just hot money. They're there to make money. You're paying high interest rates. They're happy to give you their dollars and they'll take it out. FDI needs to follow a concrete investment thesis, right? How am I going to make money? What's the theory of change? What's the long-term, value here? I do think we have seen, I don't know how the numbers have worked out. I think in the oil and gas sector has been where we have seen FDI and since the liberalization. I think that in order to have, and you have seen, if you think about when people keep saying, people are leaving, somebody's buying it, right? If there's an IOC leaving and somebody's buying it, that's investment.
Yeah.
We see it only as an exit. Somebody's buying.
Okay.
So that's also investment. That's good. And I'll talk a little bit about that, why I think that has been really good in the oil and gas sector. The divestments have been really good for Nigeria. Right? Because if you look at, I
thought the jury's still
I
out
actually
there,
read it. No, I'll tell you why. I actually read it on Nairametrics. Okay.
Okay.
So you've helped educate me, even if you don't know that you have, but you have. So if you look at the, and I had been saying this for a while, so I'm happy that it's actually bearing out the way I thought it would, which is a lot of IOCs. If you look at those joint ventures that we have been producing since the 60s. They're not producing as much as IOCs can get from the deep offshore that are newer, right? So if you're looking at these joint ventures, it costs a lot. Your overhead is high. You're dealing with NNPC. NNPC can't even afford the cash calls. So they cap your investments because if you put it at wherever you want to put it, they can't afford the 50% or whatever, right? And you have theft and security issues. So a lot of those IOCs have shut down a lot of these wells. They weren't producing from them. Once you allow them, once they start selling it and divesting, Nigerian companies that have lower cost structures, they're smaller. They don't have, experts they're just lower cost structures. And for the most part, are using more local resources, right? Local engineers, paying them in Naira, potentially, have been able to double production from these wells. And that was reported by Nairametrics.
We saw
double
that
production.
Well.
And if you look at all them, Seplat, Aradel Airs, they're all reporting huge surge in profits, right? That's good for Nigeria because production will go up. So, we haven't talked about this yet, but what's the impact of low, we were saying sentiment is positive. What's being threatened now? What is threatening that sentiment now is low oil prices.
Yeah. Because
like we said from the beginning, even though Nigeria is not as dependent on oil as it used to be, it is still dependent on it for FX flows. And that's important. It's going to take a long time to develop other exports, right? That can earn you substantial amounts of dollars. It's not going to happen overnight. So for the meantime, oil is still going to be your main source of FX. Excuse me. So it's important that these Nigerian independents are coming in and they're growing production, which some of it will be I was looking at one of them's, financial results, and they were exporting 70% of what they were producing from crude to gas or whatever. So that's going to be more FX flows, right? So that's the threat is low oil prices, but I'm less. Because for me, for Nigeria, there was so many low-hanging fruits, right? And we can talk about, this is a country that doesn't collect taxes. I know people argue with me about that, but you barely collect any tax. Not productive. Doesn't even spend.
Are these low-hanging fruits, though? People tend
collecting taxes is low-hanging fruits because really? I'll tell you what. Yeah, because if you look at a country like Ghana. It's a small economy. It's not that small, but it's smaller than Nigeria.
Way smaller.
It's taxing everybody you can tax.
Yeah.
And if you look at the budget is 80 to 90% wages, debt service, statutory allocations, i.e. the allocations they have to make to, different government agencies. There's no space to do any capital investments. Where are you going to raise the money from to make other investments to boost productivity? So I'm saying it's low-hanging fruit because you can get stuck when you're already, you've done all those things. Now you have to go and find
Is it our budget you're referring to or Ghana's budget?
I'm talking about Ghana.
Okay.
Ghana has gotten, because they're taxing, that you're stuck.
Yeah.
But with Nigeria, You're not
even there.
You're not even collecting.
You're doing like less than 10% of GDP in taxes.
You're not collecting taxes from everybody that can pay taxes. So by the time you close that gap, you have your VAT at 7.5%. I mean, we're not even moving it. Most people are at least 15% and up. Ghana is 17, right? South Africa is 15. So there's just room to substantially boost revenue once you start focusing on it. And of course, yes, you have to give people back something in return. That's why they're not doing VAT now, which I agree with in the end. I was one of the ones that said they need to do. I agree with them not raising the VAT rates right now because politically,
it's not palatable.
Inflation is high. And unless you're going to come with real cutting government spending, which they are not ready to do, then just hold on. Don't do it.
I mean, so let's even talk about tax reform. So you've seen a lot of talk around tax reform bill, very likely to be signed by the president. I think it's basically, it's just dotting your I's and crossing the T's now. Yeah. And it's being dubbed as one of those reforms that would perhaps solve this problem or give us, help us pluck this so-called low-hanging fruit of taxes. Yeah. But a lot of people are not so confident about it. Like, we've seen these things before happen. And then at the end of the day...
they're not so comfortable.
Yeah, because they're probably going to tax the same old, some people are going to get affected. And then you're going to end up paying a lot more taxes to government that would probably be wasteful.
But why they didn't raise any taxes? Why is anybody worried about paying more?
I mean, that's the perception out there.
Yeah. That, so then that's a communication problem.
Yeah.
There was the VAT still said 7.5. Corporate tax is still where it was. They didn't raise any taxes.
Yeah. So what were the key reforms then?
Is so there's an I think so. I haven't read the bill, but from all the proposals that were made,
shifting the tax,
one of the big one is centralizing tax collection under the new Nigerian Revenue Service.
Yeah,
look, we all know how these things work in Nigeria. If you have customs, why is customs collecting? Why is it a revenue collection? I know that. I know that it's a huge political thing.
Yeah.
But why customs is not? Customs is a trade facilitation agency. Should be a trade facilitation agency. It's going to be politically difficult to make that switch. But customs, whether it's, I don't even know, the data is that there's about 60 different agencies collecting revenue for federal governments. We know how things work in Nigeria. If 60 people are taking a cut of revenue, let's just be pragmatic. Yeah. Because we live it's a poor country.
That's like times 3 loopholes.
Yeah. Even if that's been so generous and they're only taking 10% of each one. Okay? If you put it in one place, even if these people are really greedy and they're taking 20% instead, it's still going to be better than 60%.
But Amaka, we did TSA.
This is what I'm saying.
What did that change?
But it did change. Look, let's look at the data. TSA, let's look at the data.
Yeah.
If you look at the data from, whenever Buhari started enforcing TSA, you can see a substantial growth in non-oil revenue, specifically from government-owned enterprises.
Okay.
There has been a substantial growth. I track it for work. Substantial growth. And if you look at 2021, those years where there was no oil, like Nigeria's actual revenue was coming down from 70-80% oil to 15% oil in 2021 in terms of the federal government. It's harder to do the federation.
Okay.
If you look at on a state basis, most of the state's revenue is coming from FAC, which a lot of it is more oil. But on the federal government, because they have other sources of revenue, it wasn't a big chunk. In the last few years, it wasn't a big chunk of federal government revenue, oil, right? So the reason I'm saying that is because they had to, because of necessity, get non-oil revenue.
What grew? Was it the percentage to entire revenue that grew, or was it year-on-year percentage growth in non-oil revenue itself?
Non-oil revenue grew.
Okay.
Non-oil revenue grew in nominal terms and in real terms.
So why then are we facing severe fiscal deficits? I mean,
because it's from a tiny low base. Tiny low base. Like even if you grow, Nigeria's budget, $30 billion last year. How much is it this year in dollar terms?
About the same thing. Yeah.
Even though we keep raising it in nominal terms, it still comes out to $30 billion.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a country of 200 million people. In South Africa, they're spending 125 billion. We're spending 30 billion.
I know. So where's that money?
Billion.
So we're
spending as much as Kenya
So where is that money?
Where's
Where
which
is
money?
that difference? So so we're doing 7 to 8% tax to GDP.
Yeah.
So we should probably be doing 50, 60% tax to GDP, right? If we were collecting taxes. So where is that money?
You said
then?
50. Where?
50 to 60% tax to GDP ratio. Tax to GDP ratio.
50?
We should be doing. Isn't that what they do abroad?
No.
What do they do?
My OECD is like 30.
30% tax to GDP ratio.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's on the high side. So
okay, so let's even say 20%.
African average is 18%.
18%.
Yeah.
Which is pretty low.
That would
anyway.
be our aspirational, because we're so far behind.
Okay,
like
so
aspiration to get to
18%. So
yeah.
that is almost, probably more than double what we're doing now.
More than double. Yeah. More than
so
double.
where is that? Who is holding that tax? I mean, because people are complaining that there's no money.
Good question. So, I might have to pick my words carefully. There are lots of economic actors. If you move away from big IOCs who can hide, there are a lot of not even small, medium to large economic actors that are not paying taxes, right? In Nigeria.
Corporates
for various reasons. There could be an enterprises, not the major international corporates. Those ones can't hide. They can't get away with paying. But even if you look at politicians who run farms, for example, are they paying taxes?
I wouldn't know.
Who's collecting taxes from them? One of the political candidates in one of the years declared their taxes. And it was a joke, the amount of taxes, and that they were able to declare, and I'm saying they, so I'm not saying he, that they were able to declare that and nobody questioned them on it, because the number was so small, right? So yeah, it's rich people. We're not talking about poor people. We're not talking about collecting more from poor people. We're talking about people who are not paying, who should be paying, who have money, right? And then of course there's even the VAT. They'll tell you, now part of the reform was to to move to an e-VAT system so that it's easier to track, right? Yeah. So it's everything from, you brought in a car, instead of paying, there's taxes that you have to pay, or import duties, you settle somebody, you go, it's all those things, leakages everywhere.
But someone also
right?
said this is also because we have a lot of, this has always been my argument as well, though, that the country is just too informal for us to have effective tax collection. Because like you said, if you had a lot more formal organizations, then it becomes easier. You can go after the internationals or quoted companies today because they're all formal.
But what counts as formal? Books. I'm not talking about... So I think there's a difference. I'm not talking about going to tax the market woman that is making 100 naira a day or 1,000 naira a day.
Your economy is 50% informal.
Yeah, but...
And so how do you then
most
tax?
Countries,
because you end up overtaxing the same people who keep paying taxes.
No. In most countries, 80% of taxes are collected from 20% of the population. Right? There's that 80-20 rule. Most of your taxes are from the top earners. You don't need to waste that because the cost of collection from the... 5,000, 10,000 naira woman is so high that it's not even worth it. So it doesn't mean it's about, if maybe 10%, like in Ghana, there's 2 million people paying taxes, right? If maybe 10 or 5% are paying, what you want to take that to is from 5 to 20, right? It doesn't have to be 100%. Yeah. So it's really more about, Taiwo Oyedele talks about this a lot. I had a conversation with him then when I used to do a podcast. Even the ways, some of the ways, people who are on payroll in Lagos might recognize this. So when the taxman comes to them, they shouldn't complain. But they'll pay you your salary. And then allowance. All those allowances are not taxed.
Yeah.
That's not, in most normal countries, that's not how, you have a salary.
Yeah.
And then you use the salary to buy your fuel or whatever.
But we changed all that.
That is it.
There's just one allowance these days. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm saying one of those things are, anyway. All
right. So let's close out on Nigeria, basically. So we've got all these reforms kicking in, and as tough as they are, appears that's what the market wants. You've also said, investors seem to like what they're seeing. But I think there's still underlying risks out there that you're worried about. So what are those top risks that you see?
So the mono exports reality is a big one. And then you had asked, I realized, to close the loop on the question you had asked about, why isn't FDI coming? Look, I think the biggest constraints, and this is something that I hope people in the administration are struggling with. What now? So you've done these big structural reforms. Where's growth going to come from? And what are you going to do to have a all of government holistic approach to boosting non-oil growth? We haven't seen that yet, right? When I say all of government holistic approach, you have to create the buy-in. You'll have to be talking about the same, like whether it's agriculture sector has to be a part of it, but we need to see kind of that clear vision, right? That clear vision of we want to be the top, I don't know, whatever agricultural exporter in XYZ. This is how we're going to get there. This is how agriculture feeds into this is how the trade feeds. You know what I mean? Like all of government. Yeah. And you're saying the same thing, and you're bringing the people along. And people can
EGLP was and the current Hope Plan and all that. Isn't that what all these things are meant to do?
But what is it? Can you explain to me what's in the Hope Plan? It's not writing something on paper.
So what is it then?
It is creating the vision and mainstreaming it from the top down. And everybody is seeing exactly how they fit into it. Inside government, agriculture, finance, whatever.
You've seen the Minister of Technology doing his own 3MMT. You've seen, solid minerals and mining or whatever, doing theirs as well, trying to get mining revenue up. Yeah. You've seen tax reforms. You've seen this. So you're seeing a lot of all those things happen in bits and pieces. So
I agree.
I mean, what other risk are they seeing? Because it appears that we're trying to solve some of those problems that they've often identified as roadblocks to attracting investment into the country. Yeah. So what other risk are they seeing beyond that now? Is it our ability to implement?
It's the ability to see that vision. You keep saying it, but I'm saying we're not seeing it. Like,
who is not seeing it?
The investors, yeah. Like, I have to feel like it's... Everybody can be doing, you have to bring it together and articulate it.
So is that communication,
clearly.
Back to that communication issue again. So we're not communicating well.
I don't know that it's only a communication problem. We also have to coordinate it well. It's not, Bosun is doing something over there and, trade is doing something over there and they're all very impressive. Minister of Finance is doing something over here and they're all very impressive, but we have to figure out how to, and I'm not saying it's easy. Yeah. I want to be clear. I'm not saying it's easy. Yeah, it's not easy. Yeah. But we have to kind of figure out how to articulate that vision in a way that people can see. It's not just talk. It's not just, you're doing here. It's not the first time that Nigeria has been doing different things. We're always doing different things, but we haven't seen so we have to see that connection to outcomes and a coordination, like a clear clarity that we're coordinating. And when people are saying things, when this person is talking about it, it's connecting to what the trade minister is saying. It's connecting to what the minister of trade. It's, do you see what I'm saying? Like,
so that kind of synergy.
So that you can feel that there is a clear synergy towards something. We're not seeing that yet. I'm not saying it's easy. Yeah. But it requires the coordination. They need to be in the same room. We need to figure out, this is the vision. Everybody needs to be tapping into it, seeing it, imagining it, communicating it. It's very important, that communicating and ability to see it. Because if I don't see it, I don't trust it. Yeah. It just looks like, okay, fine, you've done these things. But where's the growth going to come from?
Interesting. While we're, waiting for government to communicate very well for a lot of all these policies
coordinate
to work,
and to
we've
coordinate.
got a lot of young Nigerians jackpotting, and you've seen a lot of migration outside. Not just Nigeria, I think a lot of African countries as well. They're seeing a lot of talents migrate outside, the continent. Does this in any way, worry, global investors in terms of the continent's ability to harness, remaining talent, or do they just see this as it's one part of something good to come? Because these are the same guys that are probably going to send in remittances.
So before I answer that, can I just say something? Because I think this is very important. The way you closed out that loop, you said, while we're waiting for government.
Yes.
we can't just be waiting for government.
So what are we going to do?
You know, you get this because we're waiting. Government is not, like I said earlier, we want government to inspire us and to motivate us, but the private sector needs to, like Nigeria's private sector. Are you waiting for CBN to print dollars for you? CBN will never be able to print dollars.
So
Government will never be able to print
what
dollars.
else are they supposed to do?
Go and risk your capital.
They are doing that.
No.
They're trying to risk capital. They're trying to export.
No.
They've got different stumbling blocks.
There are
They've got
lots of
issues
people
with doing business. So it's tough.
It's tough.
They've got power issues. They can't solve that.
Look,
they are basically solving things. It's tough to be an entrepreneur.
It's tough.
You know that. Exactly.
It's also tough to be government in Nigeria. So I'm not to excuse either, not to excuse, but the point I'm making is it takes two to tango.
Yeah.
It's not we're waiting for government to fix the problem.
Oh, agreed.
The private sector also has to be willing to risk more capital on things that are not going to give you quick profits. If you look at our pension funds, a lot of the money in Nigeria is sitting and earning higher interests on T-bills
regulation.
and
that's regulation. That's the private sector's fault.
So then that needs to be looked at.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? I'm not saying, but like it's just a way easier. It's way easier to to just sit and say, well, government is too hard, so I'm just gonna go and I'm gonna put my money in dollars, like a lot of people are doing, which is kind of
money has no sentiments, and people will always put money where they think they can get the most return.
But you get it. The only point I'm making is I don't want it to make it seem like I'm saying we should wait for government.
Oh no, it's everyone.
Yeah,
anyway,
I mean Dangote, yes, Dangote when I did it, yes, you can look back and say, well, look, they fought him. Yeah, like he sorted that now, right? Now new leadership at NNPC, nobody's
that's
fighting
an example
him,
too.
right?
Like I mean,
But
it took someone as strong as Dangote to fight that, right? So you can imagine if it wasn't a Dangote.
Yeah,
that
but I don't think
dead before
let's
they
not
change
paint
NNPC.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
But it also takes, one thing I say is and there's a quote that I can't remember now, I would have quoted it. It is a lot easier and a lot lazier to be pessimistic.
Yeah.
It takes courage to be optimistic.
Yeah.
And you need optimism, right? To thrive in a place like Nigeria, because you have to actually believe. And I say the leadership starts from government to actually, inspire people to believe. But we also have to.
Exactly. But I mean, when you have people that have been optimistic for years, I mean, at some point, it starts to get really frustrating.
I get that.
Which is why I said people are jackbarring.
No, I get that. Okay, so back to your question about jackbarring. Look, it's. I don't think it's a bad thing. Okay. To your point.
Yeah.
There's a lot of remittance. There isn't. I mean, you can't.
So investors don't see this as a risk at all.
It's not something that comes up a lot. I mean, it's a big population.
Yeah.
So if you lose some, there's still going to be.
Is our population an advantage anyway? Do you see that? Do they see it as some kind of advantage? Our young population. I mean, we tend to tout that.
I don't think anybody's really seen it. That's really long term, right? Like if you are an FD, if you're an investor and you're thinking about workforce in 20, 30 years, I mean, Africa, Nigeria is one of the places that will still have new entrants into the workforce, and it will matter. I don't think it is the top most on people's minds today. But you would argue that the people who are in Nigeria understand that. The people who are in it, despite all the lack of productivity and high cost and corruption and whatever, understand that you can't ignore this market, because it is going to be, right, the only place where you can, you still have entrance into the working force, potentially still have growth in many decades from now. I think that it's something that will be a part of the analysis for investors who are playing the long game.
So I want us to go into sub-Saharan Africa and the world in general. But before we go there, I just want to get your view on resilience of Nigerians. It's something that I've always often pondered or wondered as well. You've seen all these tough reforms happen in the space of 2 years. I don't know if there's any country that you've seen from your experience that have gone through this and essentially remain, as upbeat as we all are. So what is upbeat? So what is it about Nigerians that you think may have helped us to go through this last 2 years? And
because
that's what you're still seeing companies post profit, which means people are actually consuming things, people are actually buying, people are actually spending.
Yeah.
This is not a credit economy, so one way or the other, there's money somewhere circulating. So how have we been able to survive this from your own perspective? I think
it's a big economy.
Ask you that. Is that why?
I mean, I think there's a lot of, and like you said, there's a lot of
without government help.
There's a lot of informality.
Without government help, of course. Like people have been able to survive without. So how?
Yeah, you said it's not a credit economy, but people are getting credit. Family, people give me loans.
You know what I mean when I say it's not a credit economy, like formal credit.
I don't mean exactly, but I'm saying like people are surviving because, I mean, look, I think, I don't want to, it's kind of buzzwordy to say Nigerians are entrepreneurial and, all that. Yeah. But I think a part of it is just necessity. Here's what I will say. Because I was one of the people who was calling that Nigeria would remove petroleum subsidies, right? Despite how painful it would be. I think that the moment was right. Why have we gone through these last 2 years without some huge explosion and all that? I think that the middle class, because it's very important, the people who lead explosions, who lead are middle class people, not the poor people, right? Poor people will loot and that will fizzle out like that. If you start losing, it's easy to looting, it's easy to just shut it down. I think the middle class had gotten to a point where they realized that subsidies, maybe even the rigid FX market, was no longer sustainable. I strongly believe that we would have had a debt crisis, an FX crisis, like a real crisis, if they hadn't removed those subsidies. Especially now, if you look at, the government was broke. Right? Oil, there was no more oil money. If you have a country that was getting all its revenue from oil and there's no more revenue from oil, right? Because you weren't producing at the level where you could have all those inefficiencies and still have productions. Now you're producing at this level. All those inefficiencies was basically eating up everything. I think there was a realization that was no longer sustainable, which is why we had an election where all of the major candidates promised to remove subsidies. Yeah. Nigerians voted 97%, maybe more, for subsidy removal. So people complained about it and how it happened and whatever, but I think there was an understanding that this was necessary. And that's why people were resilient through it. So maybe it's a good way to, it's a good way to end, or it's a good way to kind of think about it in that you see a lot of complaints, like outwardly, people, my father lives in the Southeast, and complains bitterly every day about the government and, whatever. I can't talk politics. I can't talk politics with him. He's surviving. But I think that there was a sense that was unsustainable deep down, even though we are complaining so much. And that's why we were able to be resilient through it. Okay, so let's go global now. So new global order, Donald Trump and his Liberation Day, seeing tariffs, roll back and roll forward or whatever. Not even sure where we are. But what is interesting that I've seen is economic blocks now being created, around. So you've seen the BRICS, you've seen Europe as well EU trying to strengthen its own economic bloc. You've seen Southeast Asian countries also rethink their alliances as well. Africa as well, luckily enough, at least we've started with AfCFTA. So just to get a view of where you think Africa lies in all of this. So does it look like we're better off, going towards, China, Asia, or do you think we should just continue to be non-aligned and figure out? So what's your general view of what's going on and when do you think this leads to in the next 10 years? Yeah, look, I think it's a dangerous moment in some ways for Africa, because you see a lot of Africans who criticize the liberal international order. Liberal international order, I understand the quotes because, was it liberal and was it rules-based? And all those questions are valid. But it delivered independence for African countries, right? A lot of how we got to the 1960s was on the back of the Atlantic Charter, the end of the Second World War, the idea of integrity of borders, self-determination, right? All those ideas is how we got independence in Africa, and why we haven't had that many wars in Africa. People complain about all the conflicts, but we haven't had interstate wars, in part because of that principle of territorial integrity. And so any world order that threatens the principle of territorial integrity should be concerning for Africans, especially given, if you look at the world order, we're at the periphery, we're the weakest, right? So you can have a world order that is hypocritical and where there are bullies that pretend to play nice, like the United States. But when you have superpowers, like, would you rather they're pretending to play nice, or would you rather they're not pretending to play nice and they're just brute force doing whatever they want? I'd rather they pretend to play nice. And we can criticize them and hold them to some aspirational value, right? Versus there's no aspirational value and you can do whatever you want, because who's going to get hurt? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So just to frame it, so I think that we need to be clear-minded about what the risks are. And then we need to, as a continent, my view is we need to have, first of all, one of the biggest weaknesses for Africa is the lack of common positions.
Common positions? Yeah. How do you mean?
African countries are very small. Outside of Nigeria and South Africa, all the other countries are... I
mean, Europe is like that too, isn't it?
No, I mean economy-wise.
Economically, okay, yeah.
Economically. Yeah. Because you don't have a say in the global world order.
Yeah.
It's based on your economic power,
So isn't that why we have this AFCFTA, you have the AU and all those
exactly
laws?
But we haven't, the AU has been not very impressive.
Yeah.
A part of that has been because neither Nigeria or South Africa are taking strong leadership positions in terms of being the driving force behind the AU.
Yeah.
We're trying to have this egalitarian AU where everybody, and that's all fine.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, you have to have a hegemon. Like bargaining costs, getting 54, 55.
Yeah, country to agree, it's just,
it's too high. You need to have, the way the EU worked was that Germany and France were the backbone of it with Big Brother US, right? And push things along. And I think we need to have South Africa and Nigeria step up, pull in maybe Egypt, Algeria, right? But you have to step up and, rally people around common positions. And then you can be influential on the global stage. Because if you go alone as South Africa, go alone. South Africa is more relevant in terms of than on the global stage than Nigeria is, because it has, it's played that role and it has more deep capital markets and, more liquid currency, more liquid currency. But together, you'd be a lot more powerful to rally Africa around you, around common positions. And then you can say, and then you can make demands, If you want XYZ, here's what you want, do ABC. But you also have to also have to command that respect in your neighborhood. Rwanda shouldn't be threatening South Africa for crying out loud. And if it does, Nigeria and South Africa should be able to come together and say no. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. But now that kind of coalition is not happening.
Some people will say that's also because you have a lot of external forces as well that they're aligning with,
Yeah, but that's why it's more important for you to align the big forces internally to align.
Yeah.
Because those external forces, a lot of it is stuck. Do you think whoever is backing Rwanda or even the DRC, if there was an issue, would they send soldiers? No, all the way from wherever. South Africa sent soldiers. So I'm just saying, it's all about credible threats, right? And you're not credible. Even Nigeria by itself, with all its domestic problems, right, might not be credible by itself. But if you align, and of course you have to do the internal domestic work. We all know that's not, there's no getting around that. Do internal domestic work, make sure you're growing and taking care of welfare, whatever. But it's very important that I think in this moment, Africa needs to do more, integrate more. AFCFTA, take it seriously. But it really requires, I think, the biggest economies to really step up and lead and take it. You lead by example. Take it seriously. Open your markets. Push it. You know what I mean? Make it move.
Okay, we're almost out of time. But finally, for me, you have traversed most of Africa. You cover a lot of the continent. what are the bright spots for you so far, country-wise, leadership-wise? Are there countries that, of course, from an economic point of view, maybe not political, but what are the bright spots that you're seeing, and what's driving those ones quickly?
I mean, look, it's tough. We're positive Nigeria right now, long term.
Okay.
Yeah, we're positive Nigeria.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think a lot of the reforms that they've been making is undeniably going to open up and help improve growth prospects in the future. From Dangote's refinery to deregulating. We talked about liberalizing the FX market, but also liberalizing the gasoline market is a big deal. Big deal.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would say Nigeria is one of the ones where positive. Ethiopia also, they're doing similar reforms. Kind of a little bit more like things Nigeria did a while back, opening up the economy. But they're doing it, I think what's interesting, the difference between Nigeria and Ethiopia is because, Nigeria kind of went at it a little almost too simply, right? Like, we're just going to do this and it's going to fix. Yeah. And in Ethiopia, because they're more communist at heart, like they have to be, plan it to the T and, and so that, maybe they can manage the fallouts, but it's going to go a lot slower. But they have the benefit of also having maybe more time, because it's slightly less competitive on the political side. I think Ghana is doing fine. I mean, look, I'm more worried about like the Sahel. Because we're in serious trouble.
Yeah, well, because of the coups and the military governments that you have there. But the people seem happy with it.
The governments are a mess. Yeah, that's going to be short-lived. The governments are a mess. And we're going to be this vicious cycle of you have governments that are not delivering public service that are radicalizing the population. So I'm worried. South Africa we're neutral. Because the underlying structural drivers, the risks are to the downside. So South Africa, the ruling party just lost its majority and it's had to be in a coalition, and there's potential upside in terms of reducing complacency from the former ruling party for 30 years. But the problem is a lot of what we're seeing, and I'll tell you, I'll end on this, my worry for Africa. The problem is that people are starting to lose faith in democracy. Actually, I say maybe democracy just sounds so dramatic, but like political competition, open markets, because we've been doing this for so long and people are not seeing
tangible returns
and prosperity. And that's part of what we're seeing in the Sahel, right? It's not as pronounced in Nigeria, but that's part of what we're seeing in Sahel and why all of a sudden these new hunter leaders are like celebrities, Like we started the podcast with me telling you
people sharing
that they're fake, all these fake speeches, great oration by these guys. Nobody's even checking like what have they actually done in their countries. It's because people are yearning for this idea of a benevolent dictator, which I don't think will ever work for Africa. We're too diverse a society to have that. So I think they're bright spots, but we need to be concerned about the downside risks.
All right. Thanks, Amaka. I want us to end with trying to put you on the spot. There have been a lot of economic actors in Nigeria or economic agents of change as in the country. And I think you have, as much as you've been very quiet on social media lately, but I think you've been pouring in a lot of data, studying some of their work. Who would you say, or who are the guys that you say, you know what, these guys have impressed me. I like the way, a lot of the work that they're doing in the economy, and these are the ones that probably need to do better. Yeah.
In Nigeria?
Yeah, in Nigeria.
What is it? That's really
I said I was putting you on the spot. Let's just end with that.
I've thought about it for weeks and days. I love the work. So look, I think what's very important to me is having more of a marketplace of ideas and having voters understand that there are trade-offs. That's when I started off and I said the misconception that there was an easy answer to Nigeria's problem. That's the problem. I want there to be more conversation so that people understand policy trade-offs. It's not this, it's not that. If you do this, you might have less money for this. So I'm saying this to give you the frame for what I'm about to say. I think people like Agora Policy are doing a great job because they are stimulating those kinds of serious conversations.
Okay.
I just learned about this. I think this is great. I think you having these
even
serious
though my question was governmental, people in government.
Oh, you're saying people in government?
Yes.
Oh, that one is no, I don't know that I have an answer for you. I'll have to think about that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I have to think about that.
You're not
People
pleased
in
with
government.
people like Wale Edu, people like Jumoke, Minister of Trade Bosun, CBN Governor.
Those are all great examples.
Those are like all right, ladies and gentlemen. I'll try to put Amaka on the spot there, but she kind of wriggled her way out of it, This has been Talking Always brought to you by Nairametrics. It was a pleasure having, Amaka on set today. Of course, we do this every other week. So until we do this again next week, do have a profitable day ahead. Thank you so much. Thanks, Amaka.